Let's Talk ADHD with Alex High. And today, David Giwerc. David is the founder of the ADD Coach Academy, where I got my ADHD coach training. He's also an assessor for PAAC, helped me grow as a coach through that. So I'm just thrilled beyond measure to have him here. And David, thank you for coming.
Oh, Alex, my pleasure. And just so people know, he's a dynamite coach. I'm not just saying because I'm on his show, he's a dynamite coach.
Oh, thank you, David. So, David, what's your ADHD story?
Well, Alex, as everybody has their ADHD story, of course, mine's unique, because it's mine. And in order to really tell my story, I have to give a context. And the context was when I discovered my ADHD, it was in a time in this country and the world where very, very little was known about ADHD. In fact, they didn't even have a real name for it at that time. They called it all kinds of names. Minimal brain dysfunction was one of them. How's that for a positive name? It was just bad, and they didn't understand it. And so one of the things that helped me identify was I read Ned Hollowell's book, Driven to Distraction. And that book opened up my eyes to this thing called ADHD. And what I realized, it was one of the first books that I could sit down and read, really read without distractions, without getting interrupted and getting upset when I got interrupted. And I didn't know why, why this? And later I found out why, and I'll tell you that in a second, why I was able to read that book and not others. But one of the things that became clear after I read his book was this huge paradox. And, between strength and weakness, impairment and flow, hyperfocus, and not being able to pay attention to the person in front of you, all these paradoxical kinds of challenges that were extremes. And what I realized in my life, these extremes had either I was really good at something or I really sucked. And there was no in between. There was just no in between. And that had perplexed me. In fact, so much it perplexed me in my life that I thought there was something wrong with me. In fact, even when I did something really well, I thought there was something wrong because I did it so differently than everyone else. Whether it was athletics, I was really good in sports. I was a walk-on at Syracuse University in basketball. I played 2, 3 sports. They came easy to me. But how come I could catch a baseball going at me 90 miles an hour, but I couldn't pay attention to my math teacher? It just didn't make sense. And so that went throughout my whole life until 38. I was diagnosed. And I was diagnosed in Albany, New York by the head of the psychiatric department in Albany Medical School, because he couldn't find a psychiatrist that really understood it. So I happened to find him, and I'll never forget, I went in to talk to him about it. Knowing all these things that were in my head, I was trying to figure out from the book, why this paradox and why all these things. And the book started to tell me these things. But when he diagnosed me, really good doctor, he said, Mr. Giwerc, you have a thing called ADHD. And I'm saying to myself, duh, but I needed somebody to give me that diagnosis, because at that time, Alex, there were only 2 or 3 medications like Dexedrine, a few psychostimulants. There weren't the amount of choices you have today. And 2 of the 3 didn't work for me. It was finally the Adderall that worked for me, and the fast acting, not the long lasting. None of those have worked to me to this day. So I was very lucky in that the medication I found close to 30 years ago is the medication I still use today that works, except for it's generic, and generic is not nearly as good as brand. I don't care what anybody says. And I've talked to doctors, it's the way they make them. But at any rate, I went on this discovery to learn my ADHD better. And when I got the diagnosis, the doctor said something to me like, Mr. Giwerc, you have ADHD, which is predominantly a challenge of your prefrontal cortex, where your dopamine neurotransmitters are out of balance, and it creates more inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity, period. And I looked at him and I said, what the hell did you just say? I didn't understand anything he said at that point. And he slowed down and he started explaining to me. And I knew right there that if this nice doctor who was taking the time with me was having a difficult time explaining it to me who had educated myself on it, what was going to happen to the average person that was going to find out about this. Okay. And this was a time where very few, I mean, I remember, Alex, when I decided I had a vice president position in a very large ad agency. I was doing well in the things that I did well. And this started to explain how come I can go give a presentation spontaneously really well, but when I have to do my expense accounts, I start to freeze and I sweat and I get anxious. How come? What's wrong with me? And this started to explain it, that when he explained to me was that I got to get my dopamine neurotransmitters stimulated, that they're not that they're dying. Like people who have Parkinson's disease, their neurotransmitters are dying. Mine aren't dying. Your people with ADHD, they just need to be activated. They're stagnant. And so that started to explain some of the things with the paradox. But as I started to do my research after I was diagnosed, and by the way, I tried Ritalin and that made me crazy. It for some reason, it enhanced my anxiety and my stress. It made it worse. Dexedrine, same thing. But when I took Adderall, it was the first time I actually felt just the opposite. You know, you would think a stimulant would make me move faster and think faster. It actually slowed my brain down. I was able to pause. I was able to see things like, you know, even if it was a millisecond, it just slowed things down, just the opposite of what I thought. And so I realized after, you know, I took these medications, I went back and reflected on what had happened with my diagnosis and my whole life. And I went back and I started to sort of keep a account of my own events that had happened. And it eventually became my book called Permission to Proceed, which was my life with ADHD, but also models that I created that helped me understand my ADHD and I eventually used in coaching. So everything was happening at once. It was this huge discovery process. And what I found was that the pill didn't give me the skill, but the pill just put me on a level playing field where I could just pause long enough to observe things I had never observed before. It gave me enough time to reflect and process, and it was really exciting. In fact, transformation and things happened so fast. I really took advantage of my hyper focus and I went on a rampage of just creating. But unfortunately, at the expense of my own personal life. I was creating a business that was having success, but that success became like a drug, you know, and the coaching was so good that I was starting to work a lot of hours until Marla, my great wife who's in business with me today, who you know, said, honey, we're not seeing very much of you. And my response was, well, I'm providing for you, aren't I? I'm giving you everything you need. Yes, you're doing all that, but we want to see you. Just had a newborn. And it knocked me really hard when she said that because I had no idea. And this made me realize that when we're in a hyper focus, it can be a terrific thing for achievement, but it can be a terrible thing if you don't balance it with the rest of your life. It was a huge lesson. So I paused and I started to say, okay, I can work a lot of hours, but I need to have family time. And I did, to my credit, but it was my wife who became my best coach because she would tell me stuff I didn't want to hear. That's what I learned that people have to tell you the truth. And she did. And so as I was going through this discovery process, I was having great success on one realm, imbalance with other realms of my life. And it taught me a great deal about the lack of balance in ADHD that can occur when you hyper focus and you start having success. So I did that. And then I went on this journey I started with myself and said, what are the things that I know about ADHD from the neuroscience that I can bring into the real life of people so I can help them while I'm helping myself? And so my life became sort of the experiment for ADDCA, for the ADD Coach Academy, and for coaching. Because what I learned about myself, I started to test on others. And what I realized, my strategies, my life, were a template for others being able to customize it their way. Not do it my way, but it opened up their brain to realize, wow, so you sat on a rocking chair in school, and in order to study, you would study the Declaration of Independence. You would rock on the rocking chair kinesthetically while you were singing the Declaration of Independence because you were a kinesthetic verbal auditory learner. I never knew any of that. It wasn't until I went back and learn it. And out of that came processing modalities, all the stuff. But what really changed all of this, Alex, was one little study, it wasn't so little at the time, in the 1990s, by a doctor by the name of Dr. Zametkin with a Z, Zametkin. And it was an offshoot, not exactly like the research study that was done by Nara Valkow in 2009, which he did PET scans of people that were neurotypical. They didn't even call them neurotypical back then. That's a new term. They called them people without ADHD and people with. And what they did is they tested people that had ADHD and people who didn't have ADHD in areas of interest, things that interested both the non and the person with ADHD. And what they found when they did the PET scans is both the non-ADHD person and the person with ADHD, their prefrontal cortexes looked fine. They worked fine. And then they took some more monotonous, boring kinds of, rote activities, and they tested the non-ADHD people first, and they had the neurological ability to bypass that boredom, to be able to sustain their focus and get things complete. And I think you know the answer, what happened to the ADHD person, but the more pressure they put on this person to try and try and try, they could not get their brains activated. They could not get them engaged. And so Zametkin found this piece out, and from that we inferred that interest was essential to people with ADHD. They needed to be engaged. If they weren't engaged, the harder you tried to engage them in areas of boredom or weakness, the more their brains will shut down. And this is where I saw my paradox. This is where I saw that I was trying to do things that were inherently uninteresting with no intention of what to do with them. So we created a model called the I model. I won't go into detail about that, but this model was based completely in neuroscience, that if you're not interested initially to something with a clear intention of what you're going to do, you can't pause to pay attention to it because you're creating negative emotions which shut your brain down. We have to do just the opposite. And so what I realized, interest, even though Nora Valkow in 2009 said that the symptomology of ADHD should include interest, we don't see it. Doctors don't talk about it. Very little is talked about it. And it's not included. But I realized through my work with clients that interest only opened up the door. Interest wasn't enough. We can have temporary interest. There are levels of interest. There's interest, there's importance, how important it is to you. That's okay. But the greatest two levels are inspiration and imagination. That when we find a person with ADHD's source of inspiration, they're able to access positive emotion, which opens up the brain. There's a neurological component here, which subsequently we've seen that certain kinds of activities and positive emotions open up the brain, but they're less dominant than the negative ones. And so I learned that because my dominant negative stories of what I couldn't do was stronger than my stories of what I could do, the couldn't replaced the could. And that was very bad for me. And I realized that I had to develop more of a strengths perspective. And I realized that, yes, I could use my performance strengths, but if I didn't find the source of motivation for those strengths, they were going to die. If, for example, I could love a sport and do great at it, or I could be great at a sport and not love it. And if I don't love the sport, it's not sustainable. If I don't have a source of positive emotion, inspiration, that is the essence of what makes me tick, it ain't going to work. So I went on a very purposeful trip. You see, it started off just with the diagnosis of ADHD, Alex, and then I kept pausing and gaining more and more self-awareness till I realized my life has to be built on purpose. It has to be built on a mission of meaning, that when I wake up each day, because ADHD, first and foremost, for me and for all my clients, was a challenge of momentum. If I don't have the fuel to get my engine going, that engine's going to stay in the garage all day long. And so I started working with clients and explaining this to them, explaining what interest did and using these models. And the more I did that, the more they were able to very quickly grab a hold of what ADHD was. And ADHD did not mean they were broken. It meant they had to pause to identify what they started their day off with. They had to pause and identify what were the things that they paid attention to that activated their brain, not diminished it. And unfortunately, we have this thing called the negativity bias, which is so pervasive that it creates neurology in the brain that dominates us, even when we find things we do well. So I had to reinforce those positive things over and over and over again, 3, 4, 5 times more than the negative ones. Later, subsequently, all the things that I learned, interest and negativity bias, all these things I learned later came out in research. So the anecdotal experience I had, even though it was just based in real experience, all eventually got proved in hundreds of thousands of dollars spent in research, which I couldn't get the money to do. So when Volko came out, I had my I model proved. When the negativity bias came out, all these things that I'd worked on, and then emotional intelligence, all these things. And so as I was working on them, I'm not realizing it, by the way, Alex, it came out later through my clients, through research. I had developed a process through my own experience that was expanding, but was being supported with evidence by my clients and the research, the neurological research that supported it. So part of it was luck, but part of it was my curiosity in myself and my love and kindness of wanting to share it with others, because I always took care of others before I took care of myself. That also is a ADHD belief. And then I realized that I was going to die at a very young age if I didn't start taking care of myself. And so all the things that I taught others, I said, everything I'm teaching them, I have to do for myself. And that was the hardest part, Alex, doing for myself. I could do it so easily for others. But when I had to show love and kindness to myself, when I had to say, let me embrace what this person's telling me I'm good at, instead of making excuses that I'm lucky or that's not really me, I was hurting myself. It's not selfish, but some of us, and the last piece was this that I learned. We have these stories that we create in our mind. And you know this, Alex, as well as anybody, that we have to challenge the stories that dominate our brains because many of them have never been challenged. And the biggest story that I heard is, I'm broken. I can't because I don't meet the standards that are already established. But what we don't pause to realize, those standards are established without our ability to have any choice in them. We go to school and the standards of education are set. They don't talk about customized education. They don't tell you. You go into the workplace and they say, even despite your creative, we're going to put you in an administrative position, tough shit. And that's what they do. They just put you in these roles that don't play your unique brain wiring. Frankly, that's what the whole neurodiverse movement is about. And that neurodiverse movement has really confused people, because how do you explain neurodiversity but by the 4-letter words of the diagnosis you have? Okay, and I don't like ADHD as a name, but that's all we have. We can't change it right now. But bottom line, here's what I learned. I learned through my diagnosis. I learned through the people I worked for. I learned with training coaches like yourself that we all possess a unique brain wiring. We're not broken. We never have been broken. The only reason we feel broken is because that was shoved down our throat and we never had a chance to challenge it as kids. But when we become adults, and we're working more towards teaching kids how to challenge those stories, that what we learned is we have trillions of options that we process in our brain. And who the hell makes the decision that there are only 3 or 4 ways to do it? The school, the workplace, the home. They make that decision without our ability to be responsible for making those choices. That's why I hate the term accountability. Accountability is when they tell you this is what you're going to do. Responsibility is the ability to respond and make your own choice. We haven't given that responsibility to people with ADHD until they understand their ADHD the way I did, and the way you know this as well, Alex. We always ask permission to educate our clients about their ADHD, because when we ask the question, what do you know about your ADHD? Almost all of them say 1 sentence, 2 sentences. They know very little. They don't know how it impacts their life. And so without that understanding of my own ADHD, and without the ability of my clients and the people around me and the healthcare world and the people who supported me, my wife, my kids, to understand my ADHD and eventually my son's ADHD, you can't move forward because you don't know how it impacts you. So it was a combination of understanding what it is and how we have the choice to change it once we understand how that wiring works. There is no reason that people with ADHD, and we have lots of examples of people with ADHD that learn to understand the situations where it shows up in weakness and strength, and choose to go from a place of strength, not weakness, because weakness won't get the brain going. And so through my own diagnosis, in fact, sports I was really good at, speaking, there were a lot of things I were good at, but I diminished those because I was told this is what I had to do: work on your weaknesses, make them stronger, and you'll move up the ladder of success. And it wasn't working. It wasn't working. In fact, subconsciously, my grandmother and my parents pushed me the other way, and I didn't even realize it, because that's how I got into the corporate environment, by doing what I really did well. However, when I had to do the things that I didn't do well, it immobilized me. Instead of asking for help, I didn't know what to do. So what the diagnosis taught me, at a very early stage in the understanding of ADHD, is there's this innate part of us that we have to trust. The innate part of us gives us these signals that say something is wrong here. I don't know what it is, but I'm blaming myself for that. And now I'm finding out it had nothing to do with my brain wiring, and it had everything to do with the world understands and how they allow us to do those things. But unfortunately, many of us can't do that till we're adults, till we're adults. And even then, it's hard. These poor kids in school that don't have a parent who understands it or a teacher are struggling. So what happened when I discovered my own ADHD, and I went through this process that I'm describing to you in a relatively short period of time, considering maybe all of this happened in the last 25 years to get to this point, every piece of progress that I felt was like gold. Every piece of progress that I embraced gave me the energy, gave me the motivation to keep going, because for the first time in my realized I could be good at something. I could be strong at something. I just had to do it the way my brain was wired. And the rest of the world still doesn't understand it. That's why I believe the neurodiversity movement is what it is. And it sends different messages. And I'm not downplaying, I think it's important, but we have to be able to express neurodiversity in the concept of the language you and I are talking right here, Alex. If we don't do that, people are just going to continue to get confused. And by the way, when you look at neurodiversity, we're all neurodiverse. Neurotypicals are neurodiverse, people with ADHD, but the movement was started to help those people with the quote unquote disorders. Okay, I don't even like to call it that, because I still believe there are strengths with it and it's not understood. But if you don't understand it, it will remain terrible pathology and impairment in your life. Okay, and then the last piece is this: medications, when they work for 80% of the people. I learned this. I was lucky that one medication out of 3 choices at the time, that was all we had, 3 choices, worked. And what I realized is the pill didn't give me the skill. The pill just put me on a level playing field to understand where I was without my understanding of my strengths, without my understanding of how my brain worked. But once I had the medication, it gave me that ability to put the brakes of my mind on and use my executive function to make decent decisions, to say, how is what I am paying attention to working with me? It makes me feel lousy. Do I have the power to change this? There was a time in my life when I thought I couldn't. But as I became an adult, I was diagnosed at age 38. So almost 40 years of my life, I had lived this way. And the last piece is this: for everybody listening to this, you got to know you may have dominant patterns that have been repeated over and over and over again. And those patterns become part of your neural pathways, which direct you. But here's what's so beautiful. If it takes you 30, 40, or 50 years to reinforce those negative patterns, it's not going to take you 30, 40, or 50 years to change them. It can be done in a relatively short period of time. If it's a year, let's say, a year out of 40 or 50 years is still great investment of your time. It's a great investment of your discipline. So the pill doesn't give you the skill. And we have this thing called neuroplasticity, which gives us the ability to change the architecture of our brain by changing the habits. And this is what you and I do, Alex. We have to do it for ourselves. And this is what we try to model for our clients. So out of that diagnosis came all these things I learned, Alex, which is a lot. But what I also learned is my curiosity and creativity and fairness, 3 of my major character strengths. If I don't express those on a daily basis, my ADHD is going to show up in a very, very negative way. And so I had to find out what made me tick. We do all this what stuff, what I got to get done, how I got to get done. And we come to coaching or anything saying, these are my deadlines, but we have no idea what the source of motivation for those deadlines are, or the motivation that's going to allow us to sustain, because ADHD is a challenge of sustainability. That's the key. So underlying all of this is, what is your definition of meaning and purpose? And what are the essence of character that allows you to wake up today to be truly who you are? Because if you're not who you are authentically and activate these sources of what makes you tick, all the medication in the world isn't going to help you. It's not. It's just one piece. So what I had to do is find out what are the personality ingredients that really make me who I am. And when I got that, when I understood who I was, then and only then could I pursue where I am today. And that's it, Alex, pretty much.
You just ended on a really great note there, the who. Like, who are you? And, I feel like in our society today, a lot of young people, whether they be children or young adults, wherever they might be, really struggle, and even some people older than that really struggle with figuring out who they are. So what advice do you have for people who are struggling to figure out who they are?
Oh, Alex, I'm so glad you said that. By the way, you're probably the first person that said it that way. And I've done so many of these because you get it. And what I would tell them is this: go back in time and think about anything in your life that made you feel great about yourself. Anything in your life, we call these magnificent me moments. These moments in your life where you did something that was so natural. Nobody told you to do it. You just did it because it brought joy or fulfillment and gave you an intention or purpose. And go back and start with that first one. And then work with, I think, a coach, and work with that coach to help you understand what were the things, what were the elements in that magnificent me moment. Because what you're doing is, when you grab that moment, it's part of your memory. And the way our brains work, we predict, we make decisions based on prediction. And how do we make those decisions? Based on the memory we have stored away. And unfortunately, people with ADHD have more intense negative memories. Everybody's got more negative than positive, but people with ADHD have significantly more intense and pervasive negative memory, and that's what they use to make their decision to take action. So think about that, Alex. Almost all our clients, why do they procrastinate? It's not the only reason. When they go to take action, they hesitate because they go into their memory bank, and either they have no memory about something good that happened to them, or they have a negative memory that in their mind creates a perception: I'm not good at this, I'm a failure, whatever. And so all of us have what we call knowings, buried treasure. We call these knowings of things that we've done well based on what we call character strengths, VIA, characterstrengths.org. Go do that inventory. Do that because these are the things that you naturally do that make you come alive. And these experiences that I'm talking about make the definitions of those character strengths come alive. How do we describe love without an experience? I mean, it's very hard. How do you describe kindness or creativity? Through the events and the experiences that we have. But unfortunately, the memory of people with ADHD is predominantly intensely ruminative and negative. And so, Alex, the first thing I try to do, and of course, like everything else, I ask the question. I don't expect they'll have the answer right away. Coaching is not about, I ask you a question, you give me an answer. Coaching is about a quest to invite the client to get clarity about something in their life. And I believe what you just asked me about, the who, is the first place we have to go. Not the what, the who. What makes that person tick? So when we get these memories, then create a prompt to remind us about it. When you have a negative response and you have this gold, you have a picture of it, or you have a word to remind you, so that when the negative emotion comes up or the negative thought, you have this picture of you and your grandchild, or you getting a standing ovation, or you doing the marathon thing, whatever it is. This picture immediately ignites positive emotion.
That's great. That positive emotion that ignites you and makes you feel alive. I
You
really
bet.
like that. Just out of curiosity, what are the things that make you feel alive?
Well, one of the biggest ones is fairness. I'm
Mm,
sure you can relate. I can't stand people being treated. Ever since I was a little kid, I was always the one that stuck up for the kids that were being bullied or taken advantage of. So fairness is a huge one for me, and so is love, kindness, and um, I think that there was a time in my life, to be honest with you, Alex, where love was given outwardly more than inwardly.
mm,
That I thought to be liked and to be popular, I had to show love and do kind deeds for everybody, and I sort of was last on the totem pole until it caught up. I think this was my diagnosis taught me. It said, if I continue to take care of everybody else but me, I'm not going to be very healthy in the long run. And so um, I love, and I realized that it wasn't just all me, because when I help somebody through love in a fair way, in a creative way, creativity, using social intelligence, understanding what makes them tick. When I do a deed like that and I see how good it makes them feel, I'm taking care of myself because it makes me feel good.
mm,
It's not that I'm just doing it all for them. It's my purpose, and it makes me feel good when I see somebody that's in the depths of despair turn it around, and all of a sudden they've got their inner light and they're doing great things. I feel great. I mean, I feel great. So for me, it's always about serving others. That's really important to me. Serving others authentically, not the way people tell me to, but that's natural for me. So when I see somebody and that's needs help, I don't expect them to give it back to me. I would like a thank you. That would be nice. But if I don't get it, I don't expect. I just do it, and I do it because it's unfair that there's somebody that's really bright that doesn't understand what their ADHD is doing to them. And the moment we empower them to understand that and see them do great things, that fairness is just brought to a level playing field. They can advocate for themselves, or their parents can advocate for them. And what goes around comes around. I find that when I give it to them, it comes right back.
mm.
Comes right back.
That's awesome. So, one question I like to ask my guests on this program is, what's one unusual thing you do because of ADHD?
What a great question. Well, one of the things that's very unusual, I think I did a videotape on it. One of the ways that when I was younger, I still do it sometimes. I use the rocking chair to meditate. Moving meditate. I can't, and I'm not meditating, I'm mindfully breathing.
Mm,
I do breath because when I'm feeling, a part of my ADHD is constant anxiety,
mm,
not psychological anxiety, genetic anxiety, which I inherited from my father. It's just a tendency to wake up pretty much every day and feel anxiety and movement. I've got to be moving. That's
mm,
not unusual for a lot of people with ADHD, but I read moving, I talk moving, I coach moving. So moving is a huge part of that. And the other thing that I did that was really unusual is, I played college basketball, and my nickname was Dribbles, not because I salivated a lot, because I was a good ball handler, okay? And one of the ways that I would calm myself down after a workout is I would put headphones on with music. I would stretch my legs out, and I would dribble 2 mini basketballs at the same time, really fast, all simultaneously. Now, that's not the same thing as multitasking. Multitasking means I do 3 different activities that require cognitive attention. But these are things that are naturally in my DNA. Dribbling for years, stretching for years, and breathing for years, listening to music. I'm listening, I'm moving, and I'm organizing all at the same time because I don't have to think about them. So
mm.
that's multitasking is a myth. This is just automatic. So I want to make that distinction because it's not multitasking. And that was the other thing is everything I've created, I use voice activated software. My
Mm,
book, Permission to Proceed, was done with voice activated software. However, that's where I get the ideas down when they come fast, because I never used to be able to capture them quickly enough. And what would happen is I would say, oh, I'll remember that tomorrow. And I would obviously forget the next day. So the moment it happens, I have it on my phone. I have a software program called speechnotes.com. It's free. It's just a dictation system. There's plenty of them. And I go in and I just vomit all my ideas on there and I see the patterns. And that's how ADDCA was created. That's how a lot of the content was created. That's how the book was created. But there's something else. I would take those ideas and I would use a software program called Mind Manager, where I take the ideas, but I needed visual symbols because I'm a contextual thinker. I needed to feel the concepts first visually, and then I put the words that matched with it under the pictures. And I never knew I did this until I was in my 40s. I did know that I was very much an auditory learner, but that was when I was learning. When I was creating, I needed to verbally process and have pictures to put the things together. And then it was like, put the concepts together. It became very easy. Whereas before, all these ideas were stuck in my head and I could never get them out. So that was that's what helped me really access my inner creativity. Was you can have all these great ideas, but if you can't capture them, what good is it? And so the voice activation allowed me to do that.
That's awesome. Yeah. Any tools like that are going to be really helpful. So thank you so much for joining us today. Before I let you go, if people really enjoyed this interview, I know I did, how can they find more David Giwerc? What can they do?
Well, of course, I love the Academy. And but if you wanna find me personally, you can send something to info at ADDCA.com. And I promise you, I won't get back to you maybe the next day, but I get back to everybody. That's the first thing. And the second thing is if you just want to get educated about ADHD, well, read my book, Permission to Proceed. I'm going to be doing a sequel to it, I hope, in the next year, hopefully called Permission to Succeed, if I can get that out. You can really, that'll help you understand a lot of what I was discussing today. And then if you want to learn more about ADHD, take one of our courses, Simply ADHD, which Alex took, and Personal Transformation. People will come out of that program, may not be coaches, but that's the prerequisite for it. But you'll be able to be a very good advocate for ADHD, knowing those two courses. You'll be able to educate a lot of people. So those are the three areas. Of course, I'd love to hear from everybody. I always do. So Alex, I just want to say one thing. This man is so freaking creative. If you ever get a chance to see, he did talent shows. He writes beautifully. He's a great coach. If you have a chance to coach with this man or hire him from content creation, do it. Do it. He's amazing. And I don't say this easily. I have lots of choices of where I can give my time. And the moment Alex asked me, I said, I'm there at the expense of others because I know the integrity of this man and how smart and intelligent and creative he is, and a big heart. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So thank you for having me, Alex.
Yeah. Thank you for being here. And thank you for the kind words. Not necessary, but gratefully received.
It's easy to say when it's true.
Thank you. And thank you for all watching, and we will see you next time.